Left to its own devices, the human mind rarely just sits still. It loves to wander, and more often than not, it drifts straight into dark territory, latching on to sudden spikes of anger, resentment, or jealousy. The longer we dwell in those spaces, the more chaotic our internal world becomes. We all want a peaceful mind, but we are rarely taught the actual mechanics of how to pull ourselves out of that downward spiral. Finding that quiet requires a deliberate intervention. But here is the catch. Trying to violently wrestle your mind into submission usually just stirs up the water even more. Before you can intervene, there is one foundational requirement you have to develop: awareness. It sounds basic, but you cannot control or redirect a thought if you don't even realize you are having it. If you aren't actively observing your own thinking, you are entirely at its mercy. Take a second right now. Notice the thought passing through your head in this exact moment. Catching that thought precisely as it forms is the single trigger that grants you the leverage to actually do something about it. Once you have that awareness, you can begin a gradual mental training. Step 1 is the gentle shift. The second you catch a negative emotion, you actively pivot your attention towards something wholesome. Think of a specific time you helped someone, or recall a quiet memory that brought you peace. By intentionally surfacing a positive state of mind, you organically crowd out the negativity before it takes root. But sometimes the anger or jealousy is too loud, and that gentle shift simply fails. When that happens, you escalate to step 2, logical reflection. This diagram illustrates what happens when a negative emotion grows unchecked. If you keep nursing that anger, you realistically map out the cascade of consequences. What happens to me and those around me if I let this thought dictate my actions? When you force yourself to see the stark reality of the damage it will cause, the mind naturally recoils. Recognizing that objective chain of consequences logically pushes you to distance yourself from the initial emotion. Together, wholesome redirection and objective logic serve as your vital first line of defense in protecting your internal peace. If a thought is stubborn enough to survive logic, you move to step 3. You give it absolutely zero attention. Notice how a tiny object can cast a massive shadow depending on how the light hits it. Our focus works the exact same way. Negative thoughts grow exponentially based on the amount of attention we feed them. Think of a toddler who takes a minor tumble. If a parent panics, the child wails. But if the parent gives the fall no energy, the child brushes it off. You have to treat stubborn thoughts similarly. Starve the emotion of your active engagement. Let it sit there alone, and it will eventually lose its power and fade. It is a strange paradox. Often the most powerful form of mental control is active, deliberate inaction. Yet if you remain highly distracted and the mind is deeply agitated, you deploy step 4. You intentionally relax the entire physical and mental process of thinking. A negative state is rough, busy, and exhausting. You counteract that turbulence by introducing soft, subtle conceptual frameworks into your focus, like a deep sense of gratitude, a focus on compassion, or pure loving kindness to smooth out the mental static. Finally, we reach the 5th step, the desperate measure. If all else fails, you attempt to crush the negative thought with sheer, forceful awareness. But there is a critical warning here. This requires immense skill and experience. If you try to violently force your mind into submission without long-term practice, you will likely cause those negative thoughts to multiply. The stark danger of that final measure proves exactly why mastering the first 4 gentle steps is so essential. Brute force is a highly volatile tool to use on your own psyche. This framework redefines control as a technical skill. It is a specific sequence of catching the thought, redirecting the focus, and eventually learning how to let the energy dissipate on its own. Unwiring decades of emotional habits does not happen in a single afternoon. There is no quick psychological fix. It is a deliberate, lifelong practice. But every time you successfully step back from anger or resentment, the skill compounds. Day by day, habit by habit, it becomes a little bit easier to choose quiet over chaos. Through this persistent work, the noise starts to fade. The storm won't stop forever, but you develop the capacity to return to this stillness when the wind picks up.